Everybody to our next installment of our Lunch and Learn series. I'm Matt Doobie. I'm the vice chair of the main GIS user group, and I'm joined by Becky Schaffner, who is our chair. Today, we're going to have a talk by Dr. Lauren Mayhew about AI, data privacy, low Earth orbit satellites, and cybersecurity initiatives. Before we get into that, we got to save the date for October 16th. We have our annual conference. It'll be at the Buchanan Alumni House at the University of Maine in Orono. We encourage people to carpool to that if they're coming from further away. I'm working on our next Lunch and Learn topic as we speak with somebody from Haley Ward. So I'll have a date for that once we put that together, and that will go out through our listserv. I'd like to thank our sustaining members, as we do every time. Also note that there is a QR code in the bottom right if you are looking to become a part of MeGug. So we have CAI Technologies, Esri, the main technical source, and ViewShed as our gold sustaining members. We have our silver sustaining members, the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, the Maine Department of Transportation, the Maine Office of GIS, the Maine Public Utilities Commission, the Raymond H. Fogler Library at the University of Maine, and the Wheatland Geospatial Lab at the University of Maine. We have our bronze sustaining members, the Maine Geo Library, CGIS Solutions, Dirigo Spatial Systems, the Greater Portland Council of Governments, GEI Consultants, City of Portland, St. George Consulting Group, Stantec, Stone Environmental, Wright Pierce, and the Kennebunk, Port and Wells Water District. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lauren Mayhew, Assistant Professor of Computer Information Systems at the University of Maine at Augusta, also does some graduate instruction at the Rue Institute at Northeastern. She's going to talk to us about AI, data privacy, low Earth orbit satellites, and cybersecurity initiatives. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand it over to Lauren.
All right. Should I share again?
And if you have questions during the presentation, throw them in the Q&A and we will address those at the end.
All right. And can you see that okay? All right. So thank you. First of all, my name is Dr. Lauren Mayhew, and I really am excited to give this talk on data privacy. It is a passion of mine and part of my degree. My doctoral degree was in big data analytics and security. So I thought that I didn't know how many people were going to be here to, listen to this talk. So I thought I'd do a little quick icebreaker. And I'll spare you, there's only two. So, so why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. I know that was bad, but this one's even worse. What is an astronomer's favorite part of the computer? The spacebar. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to start off with some data privacy statistics. Privacy laws fall into two categories, vertical and horizontal. Vertical privacy laws protect medical records or financial data, and they include details like health and financial status. Horizontal privacy laws focus on how organizations use information, regardless of its content. And, the types of data that are covered through these laws include like fingerprints, retina scans, biometric data, and any other personal identifiable information like your name and your address. So investing in data privacy is not just regulatory. research shows that by the end of last year, 60% of large businesses were utilizing at least one data privacy enhancing technique, whether it was business intelligence tools or analytics or cloud computing, but they were using something to protect data and use. The problem is that is it enough? And so I'm going to kind of explore that and explore what we have right now. And then at the end of my presentation, I have some best practice suggestions. So the United States and Europe have the most comprehensive data security and privacy laws. The European Union has what's called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Now, the US doesn't have a specific standard, but one that is close to the GDPR would be the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. And, some states have mimicked those two or a combination of those two in order to set some standards. And as you'll see through my presentation, there are some states that are stepping up and trying to incorporate some privacy standards because they recognize that there is a need for this. The main difference between CCPA and GDPR is that GDPR applies to any business that processes or intends to process sensitive data to European Union citizens, regardless of their location. The compliance is mandatory for any business that processes personal data for any of the EU citizens. And that's regardless of whether they're customers or not. And there's no entity revenue or processing thresholds, which the US has, in their policies. The CCPA only covers entities that do business in California. And it only applies to entities that have thresholds of annual revenue over 25 million and who process personal data of more than 50,000 people, and their business entities would acquire at least 50% of the revenue from selling their data. So with that said, the GDPR has a much broader reach and a more stronger protection than the CCPA. It provides heavy fines for service providers that violate the provisions. The CCPA, on the other hand, only offers residents who are in California the right to sue a business for damages if there was a violation of their rights. Now, along with data privacy, we have this influx of artificial intelligence. And AI data privacy and cybersecurity in space endeavors is fascinating, but it's also a rapidly evolving field. And as space technology becomes increasingly integral to communication and navigation and national security, protecting these assets from cyber threats is really vital. And, talking about low Earth orbit satellites, these are essential for tasks that require real-time data and high accuracy. So why I say they're fascinating is for several reasons. They're closer, so they're the closest proximity to the Earth, so they move faster relative to the planet's, surface. And a single LEO satellite can provide coverage to vast areas, through typically more are needed for global coverage because they have a limited field of view, but they also provide continuous coverage. So multiple LEO satellites would often be deployed in constellations. So think of SpaceX, the Starlink computer network, or OneWeb. These are designed to offer global internet coverage. It also is fascinating because they have lower launch costs. They don't need high altitudes. They require less energy to launch, and so it reduces the cost compared to higher orbit satellites like the geostationary orbits. And the LEO satellites are key for monitoring like environmental changes or natural disasters or climate patterns. And they provide high resolution images and data. Now, with that said, there are challenges to LEOs. There's orbital decay is a big challenge, because that atmospheric drag at lower altitudes causes them to gradually lose altitude over time. And, they require regular boosts to maintain the orbits where they are. And then you have the space debris. The more satellites that are going up every single day, and the ones that have died and gone to the boneyard, they increase the risk of collisions with other good satellites and to create severe damage or complete loss of functionality. There's also, signal interference, launch costs, and regulatory issues that are also challenges. These are, when you think about LEO satellites, some of you might not know what kind of satellites they are. So I put the slide in here because I wanted to show that it's a lot more than you think. So there are many different types of satellites, and space has really become very commercialized. So we have our weather satellites to improve our forecasts and track our changes in weather patterns. We have global networks, intrusion detection systems, and prevention systems to monitor and respond to threats within our infrastructure. And these IDSs and IPSs utilize machine learning to detect and block the intrusions on board space objects. And there's also telecommunication satellites, so making long distance phone calls or broad television, direct TV satellite. And there was a new study in 2024 from the IEEE Transactions on Aerospace and Electronic Systems, and they were touting 6G for IoT that will support fully transparent services. And 6G promises to be significantly faster and more efficient than 5G, with speeds up to 1,000 times faster and latency reduced to microseconds. I include these in here just so that you can get the big picture as I'm talking. But with 6G, you have enhanced capabilities to support like those advanced applications, like the augmented reality, the virtual reality, and the Internet of Everything. It's no longer the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of Everything, because everything is connected somehow. And it also, 6G, the aim is to seamlessly connect and integrate satellites and Wi-Fi networks for more global coverage, and in being energy efficient as well. Now, with that being said, 6G networks do face several cyber threats. They have, there's a physical layer attack, which would be like when you tamper with the physical components of the network, like an antenna or a base station. You have the AI-driven attacks, where the attackers can use the artificial intelligence to launch their own sophisticated attacks, like a poisoning attack or an eavesdropping on data exchanges. There is increased reliance on open source software, and this can also create vulnerabilities if it's not properly managed. And a lot of times with open source software, uh, businesses have the foundation and then they can modify and tweak it to fit the needs of that business. And so, one question that comes up is, how do we standardize data privacy when everybody has their own version of something? And so something, that we need to be thinking about. But there's also massive use of AI and machine learning. This is beneficial, especially in today's landscape, but it also opens up, attacks, new attack vectors like adversarial attacks on machine learning models. These spoofing and jamming attacks can disrupt communication because they mimic or block signals. And with eavesdropping, you have intercepting data to gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. So these are threats that need to be looked at and studied and require advanced security frameworks, including deep learning and physical layer security to mitigate these attacks effectively. And this kind of brings me kind of round robin to the AI piece of this. So AI data privacy, in our space endeavors are fascinating. They are rapidly evolving, and as we've seen, our space technology becomes increasingly integral to communicating and navigating, and even to national security. So protecting these are really vital. And we have real-world instances of AI compliance and privacy issues like data breaches and surveillance systems and biased hiring practices. These all underscore the urgent need for regulations and the responsible need for data governance for AI use. And, AI technologies, as we know, rely heavily on personal data, making data privacy an essential concern in this digital age that we live in. It has to be understood that the significance of data privacy is crucial, both for individuals and for businesses. Now, to just kind of throw out a couple statistics here, DataGuard had, according to the Ayubenda survey, 92% of users that they surveyed saw generative AI as a fundamentally different business process that requires a whole new technique to manage data and risk. And 70% of consumers had little or no trust in companies to make responsible decisions about how they would use AI in their products. And 78% of the consumers believed that organizations do have a responsibility to only use AI in an ethical manner. So as our privacy concerns increase and AI gains momentum, you can see where there's a need to kind of look at this more in depth. Maintaining data confidentiality is difficult. And this is because the data is meant to be accessible to certain authorized users or systems. But when access is granted or obtained by unauthorized people or even unauthorized systems, then it leads to data breaches. And so the challenge with organizations that they have is that due to the large volume of data that they're managing, there's various ways that users can access it, like on-site, remotely, via computers, via mobile devices, or Internet of Everything devices. And that risk is, the risk that the legitimate user credentials can be compromised and misused kind of expands. So even though a data breach confidentiality can create privacy concerns for individuals, the risks do not always stem from cybersecurity incidences. So, a business could still violate a person's privacy by how it handles the user's data. Even if that data hasn't been exposed or compromised, they might be setting it up for a possibility that it is going to be compromised. So for instance, if you hold data longer than necessary, beyond the original purpose for which it was collected, that now becomes a risk of being compromised. So how do we mitigate the data confidentiality attacks? Well, the NIST organization suggests that given the size that many organizations and, from the continual creation of new sensitive data, that it's essential to automate at least part of the process for detecting and securing files. So, data protection measures combined with access controls will help ensure that only the authorized users and only the authorized systems can view the data. So by protecting the data while it's being used and while it's being stored, then organizations will reduce the likelihood that attackers can access and expose that sensitive information. Additionally, we need some policy enforcements. We need network protections and browser isolation, to safeguard endpoints like your laptops and your desktops from these common threats. Suspicious websites that attempt to deliver malware, they will be first handled by browser isolation. And, this will kind of contain it into kind of a virtual machine or a sandbox, and then they can download that content without affecting the user's device. So browser isolation isolates the online activity by running it in a secure environment. So if the user did encounter a malware, for example, then that threat would be contained into that environment and would not leak out, or, and they wouldn't have to worry about a potential cyber threat occurring. Also, network segmentation. This will further enhance security by organizing endpoints into groups that are based on business requirements using network layer policies. So if one device becomes compromised, segmentation helps contain the threat and then prevents it from spreading across other groups. Now, taking all that and kind of putting it back in space for a second, there are many operational satellites that are still using old technology and prior generation processors. So this leaves them susceptible to cyber attacks because they have weak security functionality. So, for example, they have credentials that are hard coded, and then they can, there could be an insecure communication protocol that would make them vulnerable to attacks. With our advances in IoT-enabled sensor devices, our big data pipelines and our artificial intelligence present new opportunities for real-time monitoring with spacecraft, with space habitat equipment, like the hardware and the system software, and even the environment along with the human health piece. The lower latency experienced in the exchange of space health data uses laser transceivers, which can also improve the security and the well-being of the astronauts and the space occupants that are, up there, who are considered essential components for those scalable manned space missions. So our LEO satellites play a crucial role in the health industry, especially in remote and underserved areas, because, think about telemedicine or emergency response, remote monitoring, even medical supply delivery and health data collection. So these satellites can really be beneficial, but they also are expensive, and they can face delays, latency delays in real-time medical services. They're susceptible to data security, and cyber threats. And there's not a lot of regulatory I should say international regulations or regulatory things to go back on. So there's a lot of hurdles there, to kind of secure data. But despite that, the potential for improving healthcare into places where we would normally not be able to go, is pretty big. So some key points to this is that cybersecurity for satellites, satellites are critical for GPS navigation or international banking or global communication. So protecting these from cyber attacks are crucial when we want to maintain global stability and security. With AI, we have a chance to have a significant role that AI plays in space exploration and research, and being able to introduce new risks and challenges in cybersecurity, but also coming up with a plan of action in order to mitigate it. And then data ethics. The key point with data ethics is that space data ethics involves protecting privacy and preventing data falsification. It also is guarding against machine learning bias. So it's a unique subset of data ethics that addresses specific challenges within the space technology. And, and the nice thing is that we have an international cooperation with the EU, with their GDPR, we have Australia, we have the US. So we have robust measures for cybersecurity and international cooperation. We need to expand that to be more inclusive with data privacy as well. In saying this, that perceived understanding of privacy preservation rights, especially among the information systems professionals, when you're engaging IoT or cloud technology or data collections, they vary slightly in the interpretation of what privacy means to an individual. And this variation forms what data might moreover continue to be labeled or interpreted as sensitive or private. So even though ISPs know the difference between privacy and security, those two words are often used in the same context when it comes to data collection. And because most privacy preservation algorithms build privacy within an analytic tool, private or sensitive information at the point of data collection is something left to interpretation. And that can cause repercussions later when data is being analyzed, because what some might think as private, others might not. And this would be based on gender, based on culture, based on country or rules of law. So multiple interpretations can construe the meaning of what is private, and which could potentially lead to privacy leaks or an unintentional invasion of privacy. And that relationship between IoT gadgets and the data that they're collecting indicate an existing real-world analytics system that directly relates to complexity behind these privacy issues and the need for regulations at the inception of data collected, not just in the analytic tool themselves. So some of the ways that we can use AI systems to employ, to monitor satellite networks for suspicious activity, for anomaly detection. We can keep our systems up to date with security patches. That's also very important. Regular updates, to protect against new vulnerabilities. And like I said, given it some ethical consideration, we can confirm that our AI systems adhere to the ethical standards, for protecting privacy and preventing data falsification, but also guiding and guarding against machine learning bias. So those ethical practices will help us to maintain trust and integrity, not just for space endeavors, but for the whole global data privacy environment. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the data center in space, because that has been a big topic lately. And the company, the CEO of Lone Star Data Holdings is Christopher Stott. And he has spent his career working in satellites and telecommunications. He's worked at Lockheed Martin, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing. His wife is a retired NASA astronaut. So if anybody could build a data center in space, I would have confidence that this would be the guy. But from the Lone Star Data Holdings Company, they would want to send a proof concept to the moon, and by the year's end, they want to launch one of the first devices. This is about 8 terabytes. It's got advanced computing and sensors, and is quoting him, "This will be the first time that we, in a conscientious manner, store data off our planet to back ourselves up." And I kind of, I laugh because, we think about data from low Earth orbit. It's already having a significant role on Earth, and and we have thousands of more satellites expected to launch within the next 8 to 10 years. So there's a growing environmental and regulatory concern, and now we want to expand that to the moon. And so I just, but Lone Star is not the only company that's trying to do this. There's also Lunar Infrastructures, who is also Lumen Orbit is another company who has already secured $11 million for a similar initiative. And NASA, they've discussed how business competitors can weaponize data and capitalize on asymmetric access. For example, like satellites are very useful in fire management. But if the U.S. wants to maintain its leadership in space affairs, it would have to be careful and responsible in how it handles space data. Not just that as it's collecting the data that isn't necessarily available to a farmer who often wouldn't be the owner of the land, but might be a third party with greater resources that could access that data and then buy the land from under the farmer to strive to do the personal data about its own citizens. So reliable communication and data centers on the moon are essential for lunar economy, according to Stott, and with NASA would support the U.S. Artemis project for long-term presence on the moon. But when you think about it, there's a lot of challenges that they have to work out, because they have extreme temperatures, there's radiation exposure, there's micrometeorite impacts. These are all going to threaten the hardware durability. Transporting equipment to the moon to set up the data center has its own challenges, right? And maintaining and repairing. We're not going to be able to just go up there and say, oh, our system is down, send someone up to fix it. So these are challenges that are going to require, engineering innovations, autonomous systems, power sources, nuclear or solar, to sustain these operations. And also, they talk about putting it underground, to moon base and space stations and Mars missions, and but what the big issue is whether for disaster recovery or secure communications or supporting human exploration, data centers on the moon could become an essential component of our off-world ambitions. So some of the things that we would kind of face in the term of cyber threats, malware and ransomware. Cyber attacks can install malware and ransom on satellite systems, can disrupt operations and cause significant damage. Data breaches, if we have unauthorized access to satellite data, what's to say that we wouldn't have access to the data center on the moon also, to lead to theft of sensitive information or impacting national security or commercial interests. Other things like jamming and spoofing, attackers can jam satellite signals or spoof GPS data, and that would lead into communication failures. Or we could, and the state-sponsored hacking. We already have, or I should say, we already engage in, cyber espionage hackathons. I would be game to do one on the moon. That would be kind of fun. So when we think about all of this and we think about what is the impact on data integrity, we have data validation. If we have a lost trust in the companies who are keeping our data or using our data or selling our data, using validation methods will help businesses maintain accuracy and consistency. And this process would involve checking for errors, making sure that the data is stored and analyzed consistently and correctly, doing general checks, making sure that the referential integrity is, in place and validations are in place. Those kind of measures would reduce the likelihood of integrity issues caused by human error or system errors. We need regular backups. Frequently the backups are very critical if something happens. We have a random attack or a system malfunction, or even just an accidental, like a flash flood or a tornado come through. We have to have comprehensive backup strategy plans in place, that include multiple copies of our data sets in our databases and offsite storage to make sure that we can remain accessible and reliable even in the event of a disruption. And audits are going to be very important because they validate the data for accuracy and completeness and consistency. They review the effectiveness of the data management practices. So all of these together implement strong security practices that safeguard our data from these external threats. In addition to this, we have our data integration. So when we merge systems, we have multiple sources, we have multiple formats of data, we have, different varieties of data. So we need something consistent and unified. And a lot of businesses face challenges today because they have complex IT environments, or they have such a diverse source of data that's coming in that they're collecting. And there's also a lack of standardization. So, as the data kind of gets duplicated and siloed, inconsistent, this can compromise the integrity of it. So, what did businesses do? Businesses rely on analytic tools. And like I said earlier, a lot of the data privacy standards are kind of built into these tools and not into, where the data is collected necessarily. So, while they're useful, these tools can create integrity issues if they're not properly aligned or configured. And different tools will handle different data differently, so it can lead to inconsistencies, especially in reports and insights. Then lastly, the poor auditing. When I think about like how companies review and validate their data, what comes to mind is, what do they do with that data when it's no longer needed? How are they storing it? How are they disposing of it? What do they do with it? And when auditing is insufficient or infrequent, this is where errors and inconsistencies can get, they can go undetected. So without a robust auditing process, you run the risk of poor quality data, which would run the risk of leading to unreliable decision making, which can, really impact your competitive advantage, among other things. So, a lot of companies still have outdated systems that they store and manage data on. And these legacy systems lack, modern features and capabilities, but also the security safeguards that are needed to maintain the integrity of the system. So without integrating them with newer technologies, because maybe it's difficult or maybe it's too costly, this can often result in inconsistencies and inaccuracies. And, the human error, if we think about to err as human, data entry, when people are putting in data, depending on what they're doing, how they're doing it, or if they've been trained, how they've been trained. But accurate data entry is essential for preserving data integrity. And I don't know how many database systems I've seen where I'll go in and I'll look at them and I'll see, like I'll give you an example, the state of Maine. Depending on the data entry person, someone might put ME, someone might put M period, E period, some might spell Maine out, some might spell Maine without the E, so all of these are different, and that inconsistency can create problems later on. So proper training, clear guidelines for handling data, but also for doing the data entry is essential. And using validation checks, and this is where automated entry tools can also help to reduce error. Now, through the big data pipeline and through artificial intelligence, we could operate entirely within like spacecraft or a space habitat to, having a communication network with adequate bandwidth. But transmitting data to Earth is vulnerable to cyber attacks. And managing space data transmissions often involves considering like the regulatory bodies that oversee the traffic and the relevant jurisdictions. And to give you an example, in October of 22, the International Space Station had to fire its thrusters to dodge a collision with debris that was resulting from an explosion of a Russian Cosmo 1408 satellite. that was created the previous year. So additionally to transmitting the mission critical health data through space, you might also consider influence and pertinent bodies that oversee data traffic, in space to avoid unnecessary interruptions like collisions and debris. Because, there's over 11,000 low Earth orbit satellites, and more are being put up there every day. And so unauthorized disruptions in the transmission of commands and signals and data, these can hinder space operations, and malicious cyber activities like jamming and unauthorized command transmissions, sensor data spoofing, denial of service attacks. These present significant threats to the key data area, data transmission. So in cybersecurity threats, obviously these are growing concerns, but we have increasing types of attacks on our infrastructure. We have global concerns, with countries like China and Russia and North Korea developing counter space capabilities, and they include cyber attacks on satellite infrastructure. We have the legislative actions, in response to these threats. And the problem is that we're more reactive than proactive. And, so all of these kind of key points highlight the importance of cybersecurity measures to protect our space technology, which protects our space data. And this is really relevant, especially if we want to put a data center on the moon. So our AI and our IoT devices are increasingly being linked to enhanced data collection and processing and communication. We have sensors, they're collecting vast amounts of data. We have satellites that are collecting. We have real-time monitoring and algorithms that, process data in real time, that, for responses to anomalies or critical situations. We have, enhanced communication satellites transmitting data to remote locations back here on Earth. And, so we have reliable communication even in the most inaccessible areas for telehealth medicines and such. And AI also is used for analyzing data to predict equipment failures before they happen. So we have a lot of automation, with farming equipment and with, general, manufacturing equipment. So even with the space, with NASA, they are revolutionizing space exploration because of AI. So our Earth observation uses AI-powered IoT devices for collecting data like for climate change or natural disasters, and those other kind of environmental factors like flooding and tornadoes and wildfires and stuff. So this information is crucial not just for space, but also for scientific research and disaster response. And just to give you an idea of a hypothetical cyber attack, this is the steps by AI at every stage. And this is from the State of AI Cybersecurity Report of 2024. And AI significantly sped up and expanded the way certain attacks could be carried out. And it allowed hackers to automate the creation of a unique malware script and then complex attack sequence. So, in in this report, what it summarized was that the generative AI churned out vast amounts of highly targeted, convincing phishing attempts. And with the help of AI, they were continually altering malware signatures, and traditional detection tools were having a hard time to keep up. So imagine you have a cyber attack where AI is handling every step of the attack. It's gathering data on the organization's vulnerabilities, crafting complex multi-stage attacks, targeting individuals with personal phishing, automating the exploitation of weaknesses, and generating the scripts, and then finding new ways to secretly communicate. So, AI was even stealing, in this scenario, account credentials and pinpointing what data to exfiltrate and encrypt, or make, current conventional security measures obsolete. The London School of Economics and Political Science posted a report on the consequences of a global shutdown. And they highlighted in that report that there were, it would take about 7 days for a complete shutdown. And what they highlighted was all flights grounded, trains stopped, massive traffic jams, no GNSS signals, delayed police, ambulance, fire, no cash dispensers, no public media access, financial transactions stop, no timestamps, power stations break down, overload, blackouts, so no power and synchronized blackouts, food supply chains break down and panic buying, fresh water shortage, and this was all from this scenario. So it's pretty scary, when you think about it. This is why we're talking about it. Now, just to kind of throw out a little bit more statistics for you, only 5% of security professionals in this survey had strong confidence in their organizational preparedness to face the next generation of threats. And when I say this survey, I mean the attack that I just showed you, the state of the AI cybersecurity attack. What they found was that mid-sized companies felt that they were the least prepared. And what the barriers were that hindered the defense was insufficient knowledge of AI-driven countermeasures, insufficient people with expertise, insufficient knowledge and skills pertaining to technology of AI and the increasing threats that it poses, the budget for having a cybersecurity team or response, and lack of management recognition that AI-powered threats are a growing problem. So here are some basic 10 best practices: having strong encryption, multi-factor authorization, regular security audits, data minimization, having access control, collecting only the data that's necessary, exposing only the data that you need to, implementing strict access control to who has it, ensuring that only authorized people have access to the data and have go through this multi-factor authentication to say, yes, these are the credentials, this person has the ability to access it. And, the strong encryption, this protects the data both in transit and at rest. Also, AI security training all staff on best practices, the latest threats, keeping abreast of them, redundancy and backup, maintaining redundant systems and regular backups will help recover quickly from attacks. And being able to monitor and continuously monitor network traffic for anything that's unusual, that that could indicate that attack is imminent or is happening, and then being able to know what to do at that point, and then how to mitigate it, but also keeping the systems up to date, regularly updating them, including patch software and hardware to protect them against known vulnerabilities, and collaborating with experts, that work in cybersecurity, that work in data security, that work in data privacy, implementing best practices. This is what helps create a robust framework for all of these initiatives. So going back to the U.S. and the CCPA provides definitions and broad individual rights, and it imposes requirements and restrictions on what can be collected and used and disclosed and processed when it comes to personal information for California residents. It applies not only to consumer personal information, but also to B2B contexts as well, business to business context. Now, Maine Internet Privacy Statute is an act to protect the privacy of online customer information. This took effect on July 1st, 2020, but it applies only to the broadband internet access service providers. Maine does not have a general law requiring individuals or entities to disclose privacy policies to customers or the users of their services, or even to the public. And in 2025, the Federal Data Protection and Privacy Attorneys, they anticipated proposals in the Maine legislature that would require general applicable privacy policies and legislation, but that was shut down by the 132nd Maine legislature. So they just voted that down recently. In data transparency is the practice of clearly communicating how data is collected. How is it stored? How is it used? How is it shared? And as businesses increasingly rely on data to drive their decisions, we need more transparency. It's become essential when we think about building trust and ensuring compliance, but also collaboration, between businesses, because we have mergers happening all the time. We have third-party vendors that, will work with companies, and, you as a consumer go to a business and you're trusting them with your data, but behind that company is their vendors who they're sharing your data with, who you might not know or who you might not trust. And so if this is the case, shouldn't we require businesses to be more forthcoming with how and what they use our data for and how they secure it or dispose of it? So data transparency makes data practices clearer and accessible and understandable through the data lifecycle. So we know what the data is that's being collected, we know how it's being processed, who has access to it, and how it's stored and protected. So, this is, it's not just about compliance, it's also strategic advantage, because when you do this, when businesses are more transparent in their data systems, it improves trust. It reduces inefficiencies, and it makes more, gives them the ability to make more confident decisions. So these are some best practices to improve data transparency. The GDPR requires that information shared with the public or a data subject should be concise, easy to access, simple to understand, clear, straightforward language, and use visual aids when appropriate. These requirements are especially important in complex environments like online advertising, and where multiple parties and advanced technologies can make it more difficult for individuals, like when they're determining whether their data is being collected or not and for what purpose. Matt, I know it's 1 o'clock, but I only have a few more slides. Is it okay?
I
Okay.
think we're okay. We're
Okay.
recording it anyway, so it should be fine.
Okay. So in the United States, some states have enacted a Data Transparency and Privacy Protection Act. So, for example, Rhode Island has it's called RIDTPPA, Rhode Island Data Transparency and Privacy Protection Act, and it applies to for-profit entities that produce products or services that are targeted to residents of the state, and that during like the calendar year control or process personal data of at least 35,000 customers, including like for like the purpose of payment transactions or processing personal data for at least 10,000 consumers, if they're using like 20% or more of their gross revenue for the sale of the personal data. To standardize our practice globally, countries can adopt several best practices. And so some of the best practices that I've listed here is international collaboration. Taking the best practices and what's working with the GDPR, with, Australian privacy acts, with US privacy act, and being able to set some standards, having a network of experts to foster collaboration and share the best practices, and also to develop and adhere to common standards, like proposed through the International Organization of Standardization, the ISO, or the International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEC, and the International Telecommunications Union, ITU. So, having aligning national policies with international guidelines like the GDPR would ensure more consistency and interoperability between, on a global front instead of state to state. Also, organizing global summits, having a place where everyone can get together to discuss and update standards, and having joint research initiatives where we can collaborate on research projects to address common challenges and develop innovative solutions. Other best practices would be to establish some agreements that facilitate secure, compliant data sharing across our borders, because in this day and age of, Internet of Everything, we're more connected than ever. And so we need to stop thinking in terms of, one state or one country, and just kind of think globally and think the big picture. We need training and resources to implement and enforce AI and data privacy standards, at the point where data is being collected, not through our AI tools or our business intelligence tools. Another best practice would be to engage with the private sector stakeholders and leverage their expertise and their resources, and make transparency and accountability very clear, and have some clear guidelines for use and oversight. And then lastly, monitoring, regularly reviewing and updating standards, keeping pace with our technological advances and our emerging threats. And just, this kind of goes along with all the other best practices, but, creating a unified approach to not just AI and not just data privacy, but enhancing the cybersecurity efforts, enhancing our data center on the moon initiatives, our LEO satellite initiatives, kind of all inclusive kind of strategy. And then lastly, my final tips and takeaways. The use of AI offers us unprecedented opportunities for innovation and efficiency in space operations, but it also opens the new doors to cyber threats. So as we push, space exploration, and as we're ensuring robust cybersecurity measures, these become even more critical. And data privacy must be a top priority, because that information that's transmitted between space and Earth holds significant value and risk. And cyber attacks on LEO satellites are a growing concern, especially with so many being up there, and in the critical role that they're playing in communication, in navigation, in Earth orbit observations. And any attack on these satellites can disrupt services, can lead to significant economic and operational impacts. There's also key vulnerabilities with like signal jamming, unauthorized access, data interception. So it's essential to mitigate these threats that we implement robust encryptions and regular security audits and advanced monitoring systems. And this is where international collaboration and standardization and our best practices can play a crucial role in that to enhance our security and our data privacy. And our data privacy legislations and our regulations continue to be drafted and passed and enacted, like Australia. I've mentioned Australia a couple times. They now have an online safety amendment for social media minimum age. The United Kingdom passed a data use and access bill. The United States has 8 state-level privacy laws that were initiated in 2025 and 3 that were initiated in 2026. And states like Delaware, Iowa, Maryland, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Tennessee already have kind of some data privacy law that was initiated in 2025. And there are other states, like there were about 19 other states that kind of have been looking at the California laws and these other states to do some other similar bills, Maine included. And like I said, the bills that were up, for legislative vote in Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, Maine, and Vermont all failed in 2025. But, Massachusetts, Michigan, the Carolinas, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they're currently in process of creating data privacy legislation. So, I think in the next couple years, we're going to see more and more states developing their own bills. But what we really need is something federal that kind of encompasses the whole United States and not just state by state. Because when we get state by state, it's, what's good for that state. It might be good for that particular state and it might apply for that. But what if a business doesn't normally always just stay in one state, right? So they have, businesses might be nationwide or global. And so what happens then? So to give you a little perspective here, this is the states with and without data privacy laws. So you can see that there's still much work that needs to be done in data privacy and law standardization. State-level data privacy laws typically establish both consumer protections and business responsibilities. For the consumer, these laws provide greater control over how their personal data is collected and stored and shared. And it also includes rights on deleting data, correcting data, and opting out of having the data collected in the first place. These are similar to the same regulations that are found in the GDPR and the CCPA. And for businesses, these laws hold them accountable, and they impose obligations that, they need to follow data minimization practices and ensure that the necessary data is the only data that's being collected and retained, and, proper disposal after that usefulness has left. So I leave you with this final thought. This quote highlights the dual nature of AI. Much like fire, can be immensely beneficial or incredibly dangerous. So data privacy is critical in determining whether AI will be used responsibly and ethically. So the way we handle data privacy today has long-term implications for our digital future. And it's meant to provoke thought on the responsibility that we have in managing and securing AI technology. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. Does anybody have any questions? Again, use the question and answer feature. And while that's going on, I'll ask one question that has always kind of intrigued me. When I was in grad school, we had courses in information systems law. And one of the things that makes me think about with the European Union is this notion of someone attaining dual citizenship. If you have a citizen of the EU that is also a citizen of, say, the United States, does that then have implications on those US businesses for that person who they may not even know is a EU citizen?
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't, in any of the research that I came across, I did not encounter dual citizenship, but that is something that would be interesting to find out. What happens if someone does have dual citizenship? And it reminds me of I don't know how many. It was a couple years ago when the police were like using DNA from the DNA sites there to match relatives of criminals to arrest them. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of that. But yeah, I will have to look into that. I just don't know.
Because I feel like that's becoming far more common.
Mm.
So, which really highlights the need for a national or international policy.
Right.
Now, Bob, I saw you had your hand up. Could you post your question in the Q&A?
Let's stop sharing here.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
I hope you
All right.
guys found it interesting.
I'm not seeing any other questions. I will certainly say I think this is really interesting stuff, and it doesn't matter. I think, and part of the reason for asking you to do this is it's really it's a broad topic that influences everyone who does anything in and around data.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter that we are a geospatial community. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because in every case, it's going to have an influence, and
Right.
some more than we even hope and think about. And I think that's the point of doing this. So
Yeah,
we
and
certainly
that was
appreciate it.
why I kind of had the broad topics all and kind of intertwine them together because they really do kind of intertwine nicely together. Like you can't really talk about data privacy without talking about AI and Internet of Things, and data centers without talking about, what they want to do with the data centers and the vast resources that are being utilized. The whole purpose of having a data center on the moon was because the vast resources that are being utilized here that are, taking up all of our environmental, the water, the electricity and power, And so utilizing some of the strength that the moon has, like cooler temperatures and, you know, solar and the magnet, geomagnetic um, signals and frequencies and stuff all help. Like I know they have well intentioned like meaning, like let's save our planet, let's put the data centers on the moon, but is that the best option? I have my varying opinion on that.
Yeah, I think for this community, the biggest one is the idea of the low Earth orbit satellites that are taking environmental imagery. And I know Becky works for
Mm-hmm.
DEP, like thinking about what that would mean about things that are also visible in those pictures,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what that then entails. So, like, you think about cars at home,
Yep.
right? When you're going over a town, right?
Yeah.
Something like that would have enormous application in very bad ways. If you
Yeah.
could think about, that time of day, there's a car in the yard
Yep.
versus that time of day there isn't, right?
Well,
What does
that
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 mean?
happens
So,
all the time, like with with Google Maps.
yep.
You know, I Google mapped my house one time, and I was like, wow, like you can see everything. Like,
All right. So I'm seeing no questions. So Becky, if you want to kill the recording, thank you, Lauren, for doing
thank you
this
for
for
letting me
us.
speak.